From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. In today's lineup, K-State's Doug Jardine with an update on late summer disease issues in Kansas corn and soybean stands. Among other things, he'll talk about the decision on whether or not to treat cornfields for southern rust disease. Then, excerpts from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, joining Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and Dustin Pendell. Two guests, John Sache of the Kansas Beef Council and Chase DeCoite from the NCBA. They'll discuss the Beef Quality Assurance Training Program. And on this week's horticulture segment, the first in a two-part visit with K-State's Jared Hoyle on planting a cool season lawn in September or early October. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for tuning in once again. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Well, we're pushing toward the end of the summer row crop season. We're not quite there yet for sure. And in that, there are a number of diseases at work in our corn and our soybean stands around Kansas. And for a full update on those now, we turn once again to row crop disease specialist Doug Jardine, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Doug, let's start with corn for openers. And southern rust disease is still a primary worry, you say?
Yeah, Eric, I would say in the last 10 days, that is clearly the number one phone call I've been getting. Is it too late to spray? You know, the answer is it depends, and let me explain that. You have to go and look at what stage of development the corn is in. You have to take a look at what your yield potential is, and then you also need to consider the cost of the application and what you're going to sell the corn for, so it kind of all comes together. If you have corn that is at 50% milk line, you're pretty much home free. It doesn't really matter how much southern rust you have out there. You've already accumulated at least 90% of your expected yield at that point. And with only 10% remaining, you are not going to gain enough with a fungicide spray at that point to make it worth your while. Where you might have some consideration is any corn that is, say, maybe 10% milk line or less, maybe even back into soft or hard dough on some of the really lated planted corns. And then you have to look at a number of factors, and we do a little cowboy math. If you are at that very early dent, you have approximately 50% of your yield still to accumulate. So if we go on the upside in some of our irrigated corn and they tell us we have 200 bushel yield potential, well, at that early 5 to 10% milk line, you've got 100 in the bank already. Mm. And so you only have a possibility of protecting up to 100 bushels. Well, we know from a lot of long-term fungicide trials in a number of different crops, you can expect kind of on average a 5 to 10% yield savings by putting the application out. So you got 200 bushel corn, you got 100 to save, and let's say you're on the upside, you're going to save 10%, that's 10 bushels. Well, at the current corn prices is somewhere, let's use $3.50 as a benchmark, that's $35. I know a number of people who've told me that with the product they want to spray with, they can do it for $21. Well, you spend $21 to make $35. That's a pretty good investment. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say you're on the low end of that, and you're only going to save 5%. That's 5 bushels. At $3.50, you're talking $17. And if you're going to spend $21 to spray, not a very good deal.
So it's really touch and go, isn't it?
You have to look at each field, kind of separately. Now, if you come and tell me you got 125 bushel corn, I'm going to tell you not to bother. It really you are not going to save enough bushels to pay for the spray application. So you really have to take a look at all those factors. If you think you can store it and get $5 at some point in the future, well, then that makes it a better deal, but, probably not. So clearly that has been the most important and most frequently asked questions we've gotten this year. Is it too late to spray? And for a large part of the crop, the answer is yes, it's too late. But for some of that very lated plant, it's not too late, but you have to take into account all these different variables.
Southern rust, not the only pathogen that's present out there. You're getting questions about ear molds, especially in southeast Kansas corn situations?
Yes, I've gotten, what we call digital diagnosis. I've had a number of photos sent to me saying, what is this? And in one instance, it was Diplodia ear rot. In another, based on the description of the symptoms, it's pretty clear it's probably Gibberella ear rot. Now, with Diplodia ear rot, we know that it's most frequently a problem if it rained during or about 2 weeks post-silking. They've gotten a lot of rain all summer down in southeast Kansas, so I think that disease might be a little bit more prevalent there than in other parts of the state where it hardly rained at all in July when a lot of our corn was silking. So the last couple of years more statewide, we've had some big Diplodia ear rot problems this year. Southeast is the only place I've really heard about that. Gibberella ear rot is not actually one of our more common ear molds in the state, but in years when there's rainy weather, especially as we get later in the season, it can be a problem. I will remind people that is the same pathogen as Fusarium head blight or head scab. And so let's say in southeast Kansas, they do have Gibberella in some of their cornfields. Coming back to wheat after that corn would not be our best recommendation. Now, honestly, they do soybean wheat double crop more consistently, but you could do it after corn, and that's, at least this year, probably would not be recommended. Of course, Gibberella ear rot then produces vomitoxin, or what we call it, and that's highly regulated. So, there could be some issues of dockage at the elevator if the elevators are checking on that, depending on what it is. At this point, I don't think we're going to see a lot of aflatoxin, although in some places where we had that excessively dry July, I can't rule it out, but I haven't seen any personally, and I've had no reports of it, but that doesn't mean there might not be some out there. So I think the elevators are going to be cautious. The other ear mold of note is just generally Fusarium ear mold because it produces that other toxin, fumonisin. People remember 2 years ago we had a big outbreak of it in southwest Kansas, especially down into the Texas Panhandle. Again, places that are getting a lot of rain since pollination or silking, it could be something to look out for. I know the elevators are more cautious than they used to be about testing for that, so it's kind of a wait and see, but it would not surprise me to see that as we get nearer to harvest.
But the point is you can't do much about these. They are simply a factor of our adverse climate.
Right. Those pathogens are typically always out there. Obviously, corn is a susceptible crop, and then it all comes down to weather, and that's something we can't control at this point.
And one more thing on corn, potential for stalk rot, which could lead to harvest issues.
I have been in several fields where there is a considerable amount of stalk rot. Most of it is Fusarium stalk rot. I think we talked about this last year as well because we kind of had some similar weather conditions. It was really wet early, and then we had that extremely dry period in many parts of the state in July, and now it's been really wet again. And that kind of wet, dry, wet scenario will promote Fusarium stalk rot development. And just as, for instance, I was in a field over near Perry, Kansas a couple of weeks ago, and it was one of those hybrid demonstration trials, and there were a couple of hybrids in there that had a considerable amount of stalk rot, most of it Fusarium. On the other hand, there were some other hybrids that were really good. So, this is not going to be a blanket thing. There's going to be some serious hybrid diversity out there in how much stalk rot you get, but people should be out checking for it because you get stalk rot and you're only one big wind away from picking it up off the ground, and nobody likes to drive slow and do that. So if you determine you have a field that has a lot of stalk rot in it, you probably want to target that for fairly early harvest.
All right. A couple of items for soybean growers to consider. Phytophthora root rot prevalent out there, you say?
We saw this last year, especially up in the north central Kansas area, say Washington County. We got some of those big rains, and what we noticed were soybeans maturing early in the wet areas of the field as opposed to the terrace tops where it was drier. And on looking at that closer, we detected Phytophthora root rot, not the classic kind where you get the kind of the chocolate brown lesion on the lower stem and it actually kills the plant, but this is more of the root nibbling type. And so it's taking off those fine root hairs and the small feeder roots that are important to the plant for taking up water and nutrients. And so you might lose several bushels, and it might be hard to determine. I mean, if it wasn't for the terrace tops last year, I'm not sure we would have noticed it. Well, this year we've gotten a number of samples in the last 2 or 3 weeks into the diagnostic lab where, as I've looked at the root system, they were pretty bare when it came to those fine root hairs. We've checked them for Phytophthora root rot, and quite a few of them have been positive. So fields that have been off and on excessively wet during this growing season with soybeans in, you may not notice it in symptoms other than, maybe they're a little shorter or whatever, but you're going to notice it in the hopper when you're going over and you're thinking, well, geez, those look like 50 bushel beans out there, and I'm only getting 45. I wonder what went wrong. Well, that might be a good determining factor.
And varietal selection is the answer to that.
You want to look for varieties that have excellent field tolerance scores.
Yeah. And the last thing here you wanted to bring to the attention of growers, potential seed quality issues out there.
Right. I think if growers, especially in the eastern third of the state and on into Missouri and up into Iowa and Nebraska, we had serious issues with seed quality last year, which made seed kind of tight this spring. And we've had similar weather since the 1st of August as we had last year after the 1st of August. And so if growers are concerned about that or they had issues with that, they may want to consider a fungicide application about the R5 or the beginning of pod fill stage of development. They're really not going to see any symptoms out there. So you might be scratching your head, why would I be spraying? There's nothing out there to spray. Well, this would be a case. And so where there's been a lot of rain, during the reproductive stage of soybeans, and you don't want to take that Docajet, the elevator that maybe you took last year, a fungicide application might be a good investment.
Because you are saving the marketable product here directly, so give it due consideration.
A Docajet, the elevator, is as big a financial hit as actual losses of bushels in the field.
Good update as always, Doug. Thanks for sharing these notes with us, and we'll talk again soon before the growing season is over. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
That from Doug Jardine. Doug, as you know, is a row crop disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Agriculture Today will be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back with Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Coming to you from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University is another BCI Cattle Chat. Participating in this week's podcast are veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson. Also joining them is the livestock economist Dustin Pendell and cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, along with special guest Chase DeCoite, director of the Beef Quality Assurance with NCBA, and John Sache with the Kansas Beef Council. Brad tells us here are the topics they'll be focusing on this time around.
Hi, welcome to BCI Cattle Chat. We're going to talk about a couple things today. We're going to talk about how do we do some of the marketing and how does marketing play a role. And there's lots of different programs out there as we talk about the advantages of being BQA certified, but also being able to go into different marketing channels. One of the advantages we talk about BQA, it's through the whole system. There was some work that's been done talking about the value of BQA, and I know, Dustin, you've looked into that a little bit and talked about what are some of the values back to the producer from the BQA program.
It's a good question, Brad. And so producers that do participate in the BQA, they do have the opportunity, I guess, to get some additional premiums. I believe there's been some recent work done. I believe they looked at and they found that about $17 a head as a result of participating in the BQA, and I don't know if there are specific attributes that they were looking at in that study. I guess maybe the study hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, I don't think it's out. But back to that return, and so everybody puts in their checkoff dollar, so that's a pretty good return if that number pans out as 17 to 1, or what, even if it's close to that.
Correct. No, absolutely. And I believe we talked, 2 weeks ago, about another study that ag economist at Cornell did looking at the return to the checkoff. Yeah,
checkoff dollars.
Would find similar results, I guess, to what this Colorado State study did.
Well, and I think that the exciting part is and we're talking about from the potential marketing side, but following the BQA principles, and Bob, we'd expect our calves would hopefully perform better.
Right. Yeah, I think there's one of the aspects that I like the most maybe about BQA is sort of the motivation to be really tactical in the things that we do. Don't just go out and do it. Stop and think about the process that we do things, whether that's, planning our vaccination and weaning program. How do we interface animal handling into that? So it's kind of the synergy of putting all those pieces together that brings value to our calves. And think about, one of the examples I like to use is just consider the amount of shrink that we might offset by appropriately weaning and managing calves before a marketing point. If we can control shrink even 2 or 3%, that has huge economic value to us as producers.
Is that doable just by changing how and when we wean?
Yeah, I think if you look at some of the data, I pulled up earlier in the day some work done by Casey Olson and others here at K-State, just looking at differences in fence line versus traditional dry lot weaning. Doing either one of those actually has a pretty substantial benefit in terms of preconditioning calves and getting them ready to go into the marketing channel versus, sorting them up and hauling them to the sale barn the same day they're separated from their mothers. Controlling the amount of shrink, it's not unusual. If you have to haul calves very far, for a 5-weight calf to have shrink in the 8 to 10% range, boy, if we can cut that in half or better, it doesn't take very much effort to realize the return on that is pretty substantial.
And I think that's one of the key things is often we talk about premiums, or if I'm part of this program, I get a premium. But if I get paid by an extra 5% pounds, that works out to be a pretty good premium, right, Dustin?
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to the feed conversions, you mentioned the meat cutting demo, which I think there's probably some opportunity there for possibly higher yields, et cetera. So I think it's not just the feed conversions. Maybe animals are healthier, so there's less expenses there. But you also got the meat side as well.
Yep, absolutely, and that's one of the big advantages of that BQA program is it covers a lot of areas. One of the areas that it covers is we're going to talk specifically about vaccine handling. And Chase, I want to get you to weigh in on this one as well. But we want to be sure that we not only do the right things for the animals. How important is that, Bob? I'm going to ask you.
I'm going to say it's important, understanding that most of the products we have, and we're really talking about the vaccines we have, whether they're a modified live vaccine or a killed vaccine, have a little bit of range of temperatures that they can handle, but it's not particularly wide in that it's easy to get too cold, so freezing is hard on vaccines, and extremely hot temperatures is also extremely hard on vaccines, as well as sunlight.
And it varies a little bit by vaccine, but it'll have it on the label.
Let's just say, there's some differences between killed vaccines and modified live vaccines, whereas the modified lives are a little more stable until they're mixed up, and then they're a little bit less stable after they're mixed up compared to, say, a killed vaccine. But let's just treat them all with kind of care, regardless of, exactly what type it is, because I'm not going to treat different vaccines differently. If we treat them all well, and by treating vaccines well, a lot of it has to do with temperature stability. So once you've picked them up from the veterinarian or distributor and you've got them in your hands, placing them in a refrigerator that actually refrigerates. I've been involved, and sometimes these are may even be personal experience where the refrigerator that we took out to the barn to put things in is the refrigerator that quit working in the house, and it may not work better in the barn either.
Well, in the barn, the other thing that I've run into is the refrigerator's job, keep stuff cold. In the winter, in many of our barns, the refrigerator still does its job and keeps stuff cold, but you can get stuff freeze in the refrigerator. So you got to keep an eye on that when it's outside in a non-climate controlled environment. And Chase, I want to pick up on one of the things. You talked about a stockmanship seminar And we've got one coming up here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, really exciting. We've been doing stockmanship and stewardship has been one of NCBA's most successful programs now for over a decade. And, a few years ago, we were able to really look at the program and figure out how we could expand and build upon it. And we started the Stockmanship and Stewardship Regional Tour. We're able to go to 5 different locations around the country every year and do a real 2-day stockmanship and stewardship seminar and session that's not just about cattle handling, which is obviously, a key component of it, and having live cattle to demonstrate with and bringing in stockmanship clinicians, but also to bring in folks like your expertise at the Beef Cattle Institute to talk about issues in animal health, issues in the environment, and really bring those local issues to life and provide solutions for producers that are out there, but also an opportunity for them to get together, network, and discuss with each other about the industry and what's going on and how we can always improve. So we're really excited to be coming to Manhattan on September 20th and 21st. It'll be the first time we take the regional tour there to Kansas. And I think, obviously a very receptive community, a lot of great producers in the area, and hopefully people will be excited to get to campus and see what we have to offer them and where we can go from there. But I'll let John share a little bit more even about the agenda and more details from that standpoint.
Yeah, and just to kind of segue from what Chase said, we're very excited, all the partnerships that have come together to really help make this happen here in Kansas. The Kansas Beef Council, we've been doing a lot of planning with it, Kansas Livestock Association, NCBA, Kansas State as well, and then Merck are kind of the main sponsor. But we'll be in Manhattan at the Stanley Stout Center on a Friday, Saturday, 20th and 21st. Hopefully we'll feed off of K-State Stalker Day. That's the day before that Thursday on the 19th. But it's essentially going to be pulling out kind of the high-level overview or the key aspects of Beef Quality Assurance Program and drawing those aspects out into live sessions such as low-stress animal handling, facility design, things like nutrition and management. How do you precondition, get those calves to a point, like you mentioned, Bob, cattle aren't going to be receptive to vaccines when they're stressed out at weaning. So when's kind of the proper time to give some of those vaccinations? We'll do some chute side demonstrations. We'll be handling cattle on foot and horseback. And then really a cool aspect of this is we will have a meat cutting demonstration. So we'll be talking about some management practices that producers can do that are eventually going to positively affect that end carcass so the consumer has a really good eating experience. If you have interest in the Stockmanship and Stewardship program that we're bringing to Kansas, kind of a long website, but you can go to stockmanshipandstewardship.org to sign up, register here at any point. It's $100, Brad, for producers, and then we've wanted to really try to, with the synergy here at K-State, we've wanted to try to really focus it even towards students, so we've made a pretty good discount for students. It's just $50 for them.
Excellent. And we wanted to thank again Chase DeCoite and John Sache, who joined us today. Chase is the Director of Beef Quality Assurance and works for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. John is the Director of Industry Relations and works for the Kansas Beef Council. And as always, if you have comments, questions, anything you'd like us to talk about on the podcast, send us an email at bci@ksu.edu.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, that was Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber. Be sure to hear the entire podcast at beefcattleinstitute.org. Again, that is beefcattleinstitute.org. When we come back, Eric will have the agricultural news headlines and more. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker, and we'll be back with more after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Now in its 95th year of broadcast service to Kansas agriculture, this is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And moving on now to today's agricultural news headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, President Trump now says a set of biofuel policy changes will be coming in the next 2 weeks. Previously, the plans were rumored to be announced this week at an event in the Midwest. Biofuel proponents want an increase in 2020 blending requirements to offset the small refiner exemptions, while refining advocates are urging the president not to move forward with any increases. For his part, Mr. Trump said he will deliver what he called a giant package of changes, adding that, in his words, the farmers are going to be happy when they see what we are doing for ethanol. Currently, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue, EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler, and White House aides are working out the details of the plans. These are aimed to boost both corn ethanol and soy-based biodiesel. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee Chairman John Barrasso of Wyoming warned the president, however, this week not to move forward with the biofuel policy proposals currently under consideration, saying they, quote, risk closing refineries and killing thousands of jobs. Bayer AG's efforts to fend off thousands of lawsuits against its Roundup herbicide were dealt a symbolic blow yesterday when the company's home country, Germany, said it would ban the product's key ingredient. That move is unlikely to directly impact the chemical and pharmaceutical group's bottom line because Germany is a small market for Roundup. The decision was motivated by environmental considerations rather than glyphosate's alleged potential to cause cancer, which is at the center of the lawsuits. After Bayer acquired Roundup inventor Monsanto in 2018, the German company was hit by lawsuits from over 18,000 farmers, hobby gardeners, and others who said Roundup made them ill. The company is appealing those verdicts and has pointed to extensive research that indicates glyphosate is safe to use. Nonetheless, the government of Germany, where Bayer was founded and is headquartered, has approved a plan to gradually restrict the use of glyphosate and ban it outright from the end of 2023, shortly after a Europe-wide license for the chemical expires. Now, the head of Bayer's crop science business, which now includes Monsanto, said the company disagreed with the move to a unilateral ban. The ban would have very little impact on Bayer's sales, according to analysts. Bayer says that Europe accounts for less than 10% of its total glyphosate sales, which the company does not break out. The bulk of glyphosate sales are generated in the United States and in South America. The Purdue University CME Group Ag Economy Barometer reading has declined to 124 in August. That's down 29 points from July. Farmer expectations for both current and future economic conditions also took a tumble in this study. The index of current conditions dropping 19 points, the index of future expectations dropping 34 points in August, both compared to the previous month. Sharp declines in most commodity prices during July and early August, weighing heavily on farmer sentiment this month. The USDA's announcement of the MFP payment rates did help alleviate concerns about 2019 income for many farmers, says this analysis. But the big decline in the index of future expectations is indicating that farmers are becoming more concerned about the future of U.S. agriculture and their farms. This barometer is based on a mid-month survey of 400 agricultural producers across the country. Now, over two-thirds of respondents to this said that they feel that the 2019 MFP program will either completely or somewhat relieve their concerns about the tariff impacts on 2019 farm income. However, at the same time, nearly 3 out of 10 respondents said not at all, indicating that a significant minority of farmers feel that the MFP payments fall short of making up for the income losses that are attributable to the ongoing tariff battles. When looking ahead to 2020, 58% of farmers responding to this August survey said they expect another MFP payment to be made to producers for the 2020 crop year, suggesting that a majority of farmers are counting on payments from the USDA to help make up any future income shortfalls. As for perspectives on how quickly they expect the soybean trade dispute with China to be resolved, producers, 29% of them expect resolution soon. 71% expect that resolution would be unlikely. And that takes us on to this week's Kansas soybean update. Here's Greg Akagi.
Greg Strube is joining us. He is from Horton, and he serves as the chair of the Kansas Soybean Yield and Value Contest Committee. Greg, the Kansas Soybean Yield and Value Contest still has time to enter, and of course you're looking for those who are interested in being able to do that and how well they raise their soybeans, too.
Absolutely, Greg. It's a great example or great way for guys to get some entries in. Last year we've had up to 100 bushel, 104.14 bushel, I believe. So you've got until December the 1st. Get entries in. It's got to be postmarked by December the 1st.
And, Greg, how many different reporting districts are there in the state of Kansas for this contest?
I think actually when you look at the map there, Greg, it's actually 8 districts that we can actually be entered into for irrigated, non-irrigated. So guys can go all the way across the state, enter in. That's what we want to see. There's a lot of entries and a lot of money that gets handed out at the expo beginning of every January. But there's also some money that goes unclaimed. So we'd love to be able to see as many entries as we can.
So this goes into irrigated, dry land, and they also look at value as well.
Yes. So we send entries in. It's based off protein and oil. And so if a gentleman or if an operation decides they don't want to do the actual harvest contest, we can go ahead and take, I usually tell guys to grab a half gallon to a gallon of soybeans, send them in to us, get them to us, and we'll send them in, get them analyzed. And those entries are also available to get first, second, and third, which pays up to $300 for that first place entry.
And it's conventional dry land, no-till dry land, conventional till irrigated, and no-till irrigated. Is that correct?
Yes. When you say conventional, that is for the tillage on conventional.
What's the deadline once again for them to enter?
Mine is December the 1st. Got to be postmarked by December the 1st. Probably one big thing that I'd like to, let everybody know is make sure we have somebody there that has to witness taking it out of the field. So usually a lot of extension personnel, go to K-State Extension office, maybe get in touch with them. But if we can get a witness there to help take it out, doesn't take too long, and we'd sure appreciate it.
And those entries need to be sent to the Soybean Association office?
Yes. Go to the Kansas Soybean Association, which is kansassoybeans.org, and there's all the rules and entry information as far as where you need to send or maybe as far as contacting for any additional rule clarifications.
Greg, I appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Hey, I appreciate it, Greg. Thank you.
That is Greg Strube from Horton, who serves as the chair of the Kansas Soybean Yield and Value Contest Committee, as he joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi there. Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly horticulture feature for you. And now we are truly in that stretch of the year where you homeowners can seriously consider renovating or overseeding your cool season lawn. And we will walk through things to consider there stem to stern, as our guest puts it. Jared Hoyle returns. Jared, as you know, is a turfgrass specialist with K-State Research and Extension. So first to the planting time window. We've several weeks to get this done, but any time now for considering it here, Jared?
Yes, that is correct. So right now, September is a really great time to start getting the seed in the ground. We may have some warmer spells here and there, but September is a good time, especially as this is not just like a one-time thing. It's more of a process, so go ahead and starting this process is better earlier than later.
But is there a cutoff date, so to say, by which one would want a cool season lawn to be seeded?
Yes, that's when you get starts towards the middle of October 15th, we try to say that's about our last seeding date we want to look at. September is typically better. The further along we get to October, the more of a risk we have of not getting that plant healthy and mature before the wintertime cold temperatures and the night temperatures. So definitely earlier the better, but we do have some time, and especially if the fall is a little bit milder, then we typically are more okay with the later seeding. But sooner the better.
Right. Back to a question that we touched upon the last time you were Mike's side. That is whether one should overseed an existing lawn, fill in those gaps, so to say, or whether they're better off starting from scratch with a full makeover.
Yeah, so that's two different processes, similar but different. Starting over is the act of completely removing everything that's there, prepping the soil, leveling it, regrading if you need to regrade, and then seeding. Overseeding is a process of if you maybe have lost some fescue due to brown patch or lost it due to some heat or drought over the summer, had some weedy areas, and then now that you've gotten rid of the weeds, you have some bare areas, and so you just want to thicken it up and really maybe put in some newer varieties of fescue that are more heat and drought tolerant as well. That process, although is still extensive, most of the time it's less invasive as the renovating a whole lawn.
If one is going to renovate, though, they need to clear that site, as you say, and that means ridding of all vegetation chemically or through tillage or both? What?
You could do either or. You can go through with a non-selective like Roundup, kill the existing vegetation, come in, till the soil. You want to then rake it level so you can make sure you get your low spots filled in with dirt. Really like to get as deep as you can when it comes to tilling, especially if it's a house that's newly constructed or an older house where it's been really compacted. Till that soil up, rake it level. I really like to roll it sometimes. That'll tell you where the high and the low spots are. Not with a steamroller or anything, but just a light roller to see it. And then that way your soil is prepped and ready to go for a new seeding of that lawn.
But for overseeding, aeration is really one of the primary things that need to be done.
That's correct. For overseeding, you can come in with a aerator which pokes holes in the ground. There's core aerators that pull the plugs out, which will help reduce the compaction. You can go over it multiple times, 3 to 4 times. You can leave the cores right there on the soil surface. You can also verticut, which kind of cuts little furrows within the soil. It'll remove the thatch if there's any thatch there, but it will also remove a lot of vegetation. So that's why you definitely need to put your seed down if you are going to verticut there. And I would remove that material once that you use that verticutter or power raking.
So from site preparation then right to the act itself, seeding rates, folks are always interested in what is the appropriate rate for their project. And is there a stock answer to that?
Yes, there is. So we look for, if you're starting brand new, on a new lawn, you've removed that existing vegetation, you've tilled it, you've got it the soil looking good. With tall fescue, you're looking at 6 to 8 pounds of seed per 1,000 square feet. If you're going to do overseeding for a tall fescue lawn, you don't need to go up that high because you've already got some existing vegetation there. So you want to go at about half that rate, 3 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. If you plant too much seed, then they compete with each of the seedlings compete with one another. You just have too much crowding, and then you don't have the successful establishment as if you would stay into the 6 to 8 pounds per 1,000 square feet for tall fescue of a new lawn, and then 3 to 4 pounds if you're overseeding an existing lawn.
So if you overplant, the vigor of that grass may be less than desired heading into the winter.
That is correct.
Right. Now, seeding method, broadcasting or drilling, what would one want to go with there?
So if you are overseeding your lawn, you could do a couple different things. Like we said, you could go in with that core aerifier, poke a bunch of holes, broadcast your seed. You could verticut and then broadcast your seed. You could core aerify and verticut, then broadcast your seed. And then there's another option that's kind of like a drill seeding or a seeder slicer, where it does slice and also plants the seed at the same time. So more like a drop spreader, just dropping in it right in that furrow in one pass instead of broadcasting after you were to core aerify or verticut. Either or is fine. If you're broadcasting, then I would look at doing half the rate in 2 directions so you get a good coverage of that area. And then if you are doing a new lawn and you've broadcasted that seed, it's nice to lightly rake that area after you broadcast it. Ideal planting depth for tall fescue is about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, which is very, very small and can easily be covered up with too much soil, so lightly raking that area will really help it only get just right to that seed to soil contact and that eighth to a quarter inch depth.
And that is what it's all about, seed to soil contact. In the absence of that, you'll have problems. Well, those are the first stages of seeding or overseeding a cool season lawn here this fall. There's much more to the project, of course, including fertilization, weed control, and the like. Our time's away today, so Jared will welcome you back next week this same time to follow up with recommendations on all of those other steps to succeeding with fall lawn planting. Many thanks to you.
Thank you.
That's turfgrass horticulturist Jared Hoyle of K-State Research and Extension on this week's horticulture segment. And thanks to you as well for tuning in. Remember our podcast service as an alternative to hearing this broadcast should you miss the live version any given day. To hear that or subscribe to the automatic download of said podcast on your mobile device, go to this address, agtoday.net, that's agtoday.net, and check that out. In the meantime, please rejoin us right here tomorrow, won't you? Until then, and for Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here, this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.